much for joining my podcast. It's pretty new. It's like very niche, so it's focused on women's soccer, but also soccer in general. And I've been following you on Instagram for quite a while now, and it's just really awesome to see, you be super niche too into soccer nutrition. And I've previously coached high school soccer. I played soccer growing up and everything. And just being able to hear it from somebody's point of view of like how important nutrition is, because growing up for me, it was just like, I'm going to eat whatever, do whatever. And that's how it kind of still is. And so when I started following you on Instagram, I was like, wow, there's actually someone who understands the sport and actually wants to dive deeper into it of how to perform on the field and how important it is on there. So yeah, kind of just introduce yourself, talk about why you got into, dietitian and like soccer related.
Yeah. So my name is Jaimee. I am a registered dietitian. Um, and I really got into the field kind of by chance. So I remember like for such a long time, I was like, I want to be a physical therapist because I had torn my ACL my senior year of high school, and then I tore it partially in high school and then fully in college. So like for a while, I was like, yeah, I want to do this. Um, and during both high school and college, unfortunately, my dad had several heart attacks. And so while that was really traumatic, he had an experience with a registered dietitian while he was in the hospital, and he had one that followed up with him. And they were talking to him about food. I was like, this is like, that's pretty awesome. Like, you have someone who's talking to you about food, who's talking to you about how it can help you like feel better, just be healthier in general. So he was starting to kind of help me shift into my career, and so I started taking classes to become a dietitian. So really, I have my dad to thank for that. Not in like the best way that he had heart attacks, but because just loved um, he loved food too. And so it was cool just being able to find a profession that really fit my love for food, but also helping people. And I always knew in some way, shape, or form, I was going to work with soccer players specifically because that was what I did growing up. So played soccer, played in college, was lucky enough to play several years afterwards in a semi-professional league, and that was just purely for fun. But I always knew I wanted to work with soccer players because I remember myself being in their shoes and loving food, not knowing that food had the ability to help me perform. And so I saw a lot of myself in the clients that I see because they just don't understand, which is understandable.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Yeah. It's really cool to see that. I mean, you're blowing up on Instagram from what I see. And it's,
Unintentionally, honestly, I'm
yeah,
really not not
but it's,
trying.
it's so awesome to see. I mean, when I repost your stuff, I have parents that are the athletes I coached that are commenting. They're like, wow, like this is super helpful, because I mean, the girls would literally go to, the gas station and get Slurpees before a game. And it's just like, I don't know enough to where I can say no or yes. Cause in high school, that's what I did. I was like, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
just gonna go like eat whatever. And I don't know if this is actually I didn't really correlate of, what I was eating before and how I perform on the field. I just kind of assumed like, oh, I'm a good soccer player. I'm gonna be good
Yeah.
no matter what I eat. And I think that's kind of how, the girls I coach, they're like, yeah, I'm good. So what does it matter what I'm eating and what I'm intaking? Does it really affect how I play on the field? And it does.
Yes.
I still play just like for fun on recreational leagues. And it's kind of crazy of when like I have the bad days of eating of how I play on the field, and like versus when I do feel myself good for the day and I do like stretch well and everything like that, of how well I play on the field. So it's mind boggling of just like even what a day's worth of what you eat and what you do for that day, of just how much better you can play as an athlete. So you're more focused towards middle school and high school. How is that with, I mean, I know parents are a lot. So how does that go with parents? Do they reach out to you and you're like, yes, I can help your athlete perform better nutrition wise? And is there any like, I guess, comeback of like the parents being like, hey, they're following, X, Y, and Z, they're still not performing. And you kind of have to dive a little bit deeper of like, okay, are they doing everything possible to like perform? So how does like the first initiation go of talking to parents and athletes? And then how do you like overcome barriers of, if they're not performing or even if they are performing, like how does that all go from like step one to like the end?
Yeah, I think it depends, especially with the different age groups. So with my middle school age group, usually the way that I work with them is more as a whole. So parents and the athlete are involved together because parents are buying the food, they're going grocery shopping, they're cooking the meals, they're doing a little bit more like dictating when, where, and what's offered. And then really getting that athlete to just participate a little bit, like asking, letting your parents know, like, what are some of the things that you like to eat so that they can, include some of those things and they can include some things that they would like in that meal. So I think it's more of like a team effort when I have middle school kids. So it's not just me meeting with a kid on their own at that age.
Mm-hmm.
We're wanting to make sure that it works for the whole family. When I work with a high school age kid, a lot of times those parents are still playing a pivotal role. They're buying the food, but maybe not buying it all the time. Maybe their kid's driving, so they're
Mm-hmm.
going and they're buying food at a gas station or going to a fast food restaurant. So those parents are like, I want my kid to be more empowered to make decisions. And we're wanting to really empower that athlete to know like they can still, if they like Jersey Mike's, okay, like let's look at how you could build off of what you already do and include some other stuff in there so that they're starting to learn and take more responsibility with what they're doing. So how I approach it is just different based on age group.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and usually with the high school kids, we're getting them at least somewhat prepared for what it could look like when they're in college, when they're having to, either make their own food or be on a limited budget in
Mm-hmm.
college. And then if I'm ever like getting any kind of, feedback from families that are like, you know what, they're still struggling. I think the great thing about how I approach nutrition is not just, okay, well, they need to eat this or they need to change this. It's like, well, how are they sleeping? What kind of stressors are they having um, in their life right now? I know a lot of, you know, most of May, many of the kids that I worked with were stressed out. Like they just like they looked bad. They were preparing for tryouts, they had finals. They were just, they were just burned out from school. And so understanding how what happens in life can affect how they feel on the field, how they perform on the field, how it affects their appetite. And so, the approach that I take just helps parents and the athlete to kind of look within themselves and also just like see what else is going on so that then we can have a plan of action going forward. And that's just different for everybody.
Yeah. So is there any like common, I guess, issue? Like, do you see more of like binge eating and like the parents reaching out for help of that? Or like for me personally, like my family was very like restrictive on like what I ate. And so like when I went out, it'd be totally 180 of what I get at the house. And so it's kind of correlating to that binge eating of like I would go out and eat something totally different of what my mom would even like approve of. And
Yeah.
so do you see any issues of correlation with like younger adults doing that and they have to like come to terms with their parents of like you're not letting me eat, ice cream at home. And so like I feel more inclined for when I am out and about with my friends or, the other athletes, like I'm going to eat ice cream because I
Yeah.
want to, but then you see it like a correlation on the field of like, I don't want to be eating ice cream before a game, but like I'm so restrictive at home, any opportunity I get, I'm going to take. Do you see any like common issue throughout the years of like that kind of stuff?
I think it kind of comes in waves for me, and it might depend on like how, like even with my own content, what I put out there. Because sometimes, like, there's kind of seasons of my content where I'll be a little bit more like focused on like disordered eating. And when I do, share that type of content, um, I get a lot more feedback from the families that work with me, but also the
Mhm.
ones that are interested in working with me. So I think that, it's always a balancing act because we're trying to educate our young people who are developing in all of the ways and how they are, they're growing and developing, but mentally they're developing that critical thinking muscle. There's a lot of things that they are developing, and I think as adults we are in a different position than they are, and we're like, well, let's just teach them what we know so
Mhm.
that they can avoid what we went through. And so the way that we go about that can often make things a little bit worse. So what I have seen a lot is parents not necessarily trusting their kids to have stuff, because when they finally do let them have, I just like using gummy bears as an example, then they go nuts on gummy bears and they just want to have them all the time. But what that ends up doing, and when we do restrict like that, it's like a rubber band. It's going to go, we pull it really far one way and it's going to equally go in the other direction. And so we want to allow these kids to be calm around food. And the way that we can do that, and it looks different for every family. So it's easier. I'm oversimplifying it, but when we do allow regular access to these foods, we can start to have these kids learn to like ask themselves, like, does that even sound good to me? I may
Yeah.
want ice cream before a game, but is that going to actually make me feel good, help me perform well? If they start to ask themselves that, then we can say, well, when can ice cream, like when could that make you feel better? Could it be after a game? Great. Like that may be a better choice than having that, in the 2 hours going into your game. It
Yeah.
may not. So I think what that looks like in action for each family is going to be different, because it's going to be different based on each family's current approach
Mhm.
and feelings towards nutrition, where their kid is at. And that's where it's really important to work with, someone who specializes in that stuff. It does not have to be me. There's plenty of other people out there that are qualified to do that. But we just want to think about how we're setting them up for success, because when soccer is done, how are they going to relate to food? How are they going to relate to exercise? Are they going to think of it as a punishment? Are they going to think of vegetables as like a punishment? Like, great, broccoli, we want them to find enjoyment in a lot of different things.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, just I have a 9-month-old, or I guess he's 10 months now, but I'm in these Facebook groups of other moms and we're talking about nutrition, and you see some people are like, why are you giving your kid ice cream so early? That's all they're gonna want. And it kind of like it makes me honestly think about you of like not having that restrictive eating and being able to be comfortable with food and have that mindset. I know they're only 10 months old, of knowing how they want to feel. And so I feel like even just the early stages of when they are able to consciously make like food choices that they know, hey, like I think I'm gonna feel better if I have this versus this. Yes, ice cream is great, but maybe today I want something that makes me feel a little bit better. So it's
Yeah.
just so important, like at all ages. But it's great to see that there's even middle schoolers that are willing to connect with their parents and say like I want to make more conscious decisions and I want to perform on the field, but I don't want to feel like I can't have gummy bears. Like I want to feel like I
Exactly.
can have some and I'm okay to have a few and I'm okay to eat broccoli too. And so
Exactly.
it's just so important that the connection is there with the parents because I feel like that's something that I didn't have personally, and that's what led to the binge eating. And after I graduated college, and even when I went to college, like I was just eating whatever because I never got to have that growing up. And so
Yeah.
I think just being able to connect, even at the middle school level, is great that people are reaching out and want to be better and have that like critical thinking mindset of like, what am I going to eat and how am I going to feel? That's awesome. I want to ask, like, since I was a previous coach and now I'm a parent, what is like your best advice of how you can like give knowledge to us as non-dietitians and we don't know too much about nutrition. We just know like broccoli's good, ice
Yeah.
cream is bad, kind of stuff like that. What can you give like advice to us as, coaches of what we can bring to the table to our athletes to help them make the conscious decision of what to eat before a game? You can enjoy ice cream whenever, but just, kind of make that decision of like how it correlates on the field and like what you're eating and everything like that.
Yeah. I think first off, every adult who works with kids needs or who has children, I think should first look into their own relationship with food. So like your history, with food comes from your parents, similar to mine. So how mine approached food is very different from yours, but how I handled food is not very different from you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we first have to look at our own relationship with food so that we can kind of look at how we do talk about food. Um, and then I think looking at the language that we use when describing food. So oftentimes people, it's easier for us. We want to kind of classify foods and it's just easier. Good, bad, healthy, unhealthy. Like we like easy so that we don't have to think too much. But the problem is it's it is really difficult when we can use different types of foods for different purposes,
Mm-hmm.
especially when we're looking at performance nutrition. So, using gummy bears as my example, some people may say gummy bears are bad, but that logic can be really unhelpful because gummy bears don't have any fiber. They're an easy digestible carbohydrate source. They're fun. They taste good. And if that helps your athlete have energy, fantastic. So then that food can't be bad because it's helpful to give
Mm-hmm.
them energy. So I think not kind of peeling back the black and white thinking and starting to use just more neutral words to identify food. So just call food what it is. Instead of good or bad, it's like ice cream is ice cream. It's our dessert.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's going to be your energy snack, those gummy bears. They're also probably going to be used at like the movie theater, whatever. Like an apple is an apple. Using more neutral terms to describe food can be really helpful, as well as just making sure that we are not um, commenting on people's food choices or, even their bodies, I think is really helpful. So when most often when I get feedback from parents, it's because a coach has said something along the lines of, if you want to be X, Y, and Z, you need to lose weight. And they'll even put numbers behind it. And it's like these kids are developing, they have to grow. Like we need their bodies to gain weight. We need to normalize weight gain. And so I think that's where coaches can encourage weight gain
Mm-hmm.
for these athletes because it's actually necessary for their bones to develop well, for all the health systems in their body to function optimally. They have to gain weight because if we honestly had like a 30-year-old who looked like a 10-year in a 10-year-old's body, that'd be weird. Like we would we would be like, something's wrong.
Yeah.
But when we have like a 16-year-old who is struggling with that, and then we have a coach adding on to it, that can really be a slippery slope for that player to dabble in dieting and just practices that are really harmful for their body, but also their performance.
Hmm. That's huge. Yeah. I know I had like a couple of girls, come up to me and they're like, I want to perform better on the field. And in that moment, I mean, I go back to, back in college when I had a coach say, if you want to play more, you need to lose weight in front of the team. And I I've never had anybody comment on my weight. I've always been, I'm 5'8". I used to be able to bench more than more of the girls and squat more. I've just always loved lifting. So I've always been bigger because of my muscle. And having him say that in front of the team during a game, it just brings me back to that thought. And when the girls ask like how they want to get better, it's I'm like, okay, I can spend extra time with you, but what are we doing outside? Are we stressed out? Because if you're
Mhm.
stressed out, your mind's not in the game. Your mind is not here right now.
100%.
And personally, when I'm stressed out, I'm just eating whatever because I stress eat. And so I have to dive deep into that, but there's like a barrier where I don't want to step and say, well, you're not passing any of the fitness tests because you look like this. And it's not
Yeah.
like there's no reason to say that. And so it's kind of crazy that coaches are saying that. And especially with, female athletes, it's just a super delicate topic of you say even just like the wrong word, they take that so like seriously because they look up to you. You're their coach.
Exactly.
You're trying to help them be better, that it could lead them down a slippery slope. And I think it's hard for coaches to kind of figure out what to say in that sense of, I know what they're eating and it's not helping them, but also, are you sleeping well? Are you stressed? How was school? How's your social life? Because
Yep.
all of that kind of just plays a part on how you're going to perform on the field. And it's just a really hard topic to talk about. And so being able to hear you say of like what we should be saying to the athletes who want to get better is super helpful. And I hope like other people listen to this and take that into consideration of what we should be saying to these athletes because they look up to us. And I mean, that coach said it to me back in 2015, which
And
is
it stuck with you.
long time ago, and I still remember it to this day. Like I vividly remember that. And I just always remember like I would never want to put any of my athletes, my son in that position to where he's scarred for life.
Well,
And
and I think that like coaches, you said it perfectly. Like coaches like give simple answers to something that's more than just like what they eat. Like what what is what is happening with these kids is not just like, yeah, they're kids. They're still learning and exploring food, and they are learning about themselves. So they are not eating quote unquote perfectly. Like, but who is, and why does that have to be something that we strive for? But when we tell a kid, or and I'm using like middle school and high school age kids, but like when we're telling them that they need to lose weight or they need to eat better, what that actually means to them is that they need to cut out stuff.
mhm,
That then leads to that restriction. So instead of encouraging them to like eat better, which is such a blanket term, it doesn't mean anything, it means different to everybody,
mhm,
is what can they add? So if they're not like, did they eat breakfast that morning? If they didn't, then encourage them to eat something at breakfast, even
mhm,
if it's not a full breakfast. Encourage them to eat something. Did they eat at school? If they didn't, encourage them to pack something or eat something at lunch. Like, you don't have to give like nutrition advice, like specific nutrition advice. You can ask people what's going on in their life if they haven't eaten before they played, go through some easy carbohydrate sources that they might be able to pack in their backpack.
Mhm.
That stuff goes a long way because then you could ask them how they felt during that training session, during that game. How they feel is going to be a big driver for them doing those habits again. And so when they actually, for coaches, I would rather them think about how kids could add foods to what they're already doing rather than taking it away.
Mhm.
Um, and again, that just is because of that restriction that often happens will lead to them will lead to them feeling out of control when they finally do get food.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. It's it's funny because like in high school when I played, we got food after the game. And so like we'd literally go to school, we'd have our lunch at, noon, and then we'd go and have our game at 5 o'clock. So if it was an away game, you most likely just stuck around at school and had like a granola bar, and then you got food after the game. And again, it didn't really correlate to like, it didn't really like set in my mind of like, we should eat before a game. And when I started coaching at the high school that I was coaching at, they were like, "Oh, we eat before games." And I'm just like, it just kind of like clicked in my brain. I'm like,
Yeah.
why wouldn't we eat? Like you guys
Yeah.
have ate since like 11 in the morning. Maybe you had
Yeah.
a granola bar during class, but it's good to see like they understand that that's
Mhm.
common sense of like we need to eat before a game if we want to perform. And
Exactly.
it was just awesome to see like that they're able to like make those conscious decisions because I didn't know that. In high school, it was
Yeah.
like we ate after the game.
Yeah. This is just what we do. And it's
Yeah,
like you went like maybe 9+ hours without eating something. How are you going to have energy?
legit. And so when I see it happen at the high school I was coaching at, I'm like, okay, like we're progressing. Like I was in high school, I graduated in 2013, and these girls are just graduating
Yeah.
now. I'm like, cool, we're progressing. Like we're understanding like we need to
Yeah.
eat to perform on the field. And I also think, some of that comes from club play because the
Hmm.
girls understand like when they're away, like you eat before a game,
Yep.
and they were able to bring that into like high school sense of like, hey, we eat before a game, we don't eat after. Uh,
Yeah.
so it's good to see that we're progressing. We know how
Change
we're
is
supposed to be.
slow, but it
Yeah. So it's good to see that. I mean, we sometimes did that in college, like our away games we'd eat, but I mean, some of our away games are like 3 hours away. And so we're like, man, we're still having like
oh my
4 hours
gosh.
not eating. And then when you get food after it, I'm like, all right, am I hungry or am I just like sitting here for just to eat? Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's good to see that we're coming alive a little bit. I wanted to ask you, how does like sleep, nutrition, stress, how does that all like play in together in like your social life? How does that help you perform? Oh, this is popping up in my end. Like on the field better. Like how does that all correlate together?
Yeah, I mean, they're all interconnected. If we're not sleeping well, if we're not sleeping well, and I see this when my clients have like really late training sessions or really early training sessions, that they're, if they have a late training session, they're still kind of riding this high, this energy high. So it's harder for them to sleep. They don't get as good quality of a sleep or like the length of time. And then that just kind of snowballs into, when they need to eat breakfast, they'll sleep in later. So then they're already behind in, eating breakfast and meeting their energy needs. So it's just catching up. So when they're not sleeping well, it affects their appetite either way. And then you add stress in there, and people respond to stress differently. And stress can be a good thing. Like when you're training, that's a really good stress to put on the body. But then when we have stress that comes from maybe um, our relationships that we are in with our parents, with our friends, with our teammates, with our coaches, when there's a stress there, that can impact how someone eats. So maybe they, you know, deal with that in by emotionally eating, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but we want to explore what else those feelings are. And then they may just not eat because they're so stressed and they don't have that appetite. So being able to get consistent sleep, and kids generally need about 8 to 10 hours every night. So aiming for that is really important. Um, and then making sure that we are aware that stress is going to come, it's inevitable, but how it affects us is going to affect our appetite. And so, we can improve our diet and we can do those things, but if we're not dealing with our stress in good ways, then everything is going to kind of be out of whack. And so we really want to make sure that we have, we're not missing any meals. We are getting good quality sleep, which can be hard for teenagers, especially.
Mhm.
And then, being aware of what stresses us out, and then things that we can do to kind of alleviate that stress: journaling, meditation, going on walks, like taking break, from our sport, even just for a little bit, so we can come back and enjoy it again.
Mhm.
So
That's awesome. Well, I don't have any other questions. I learned so much and I appreciate you like coming on and dealing with my no
no,
headphones microphone. I could not figure it out.
no, I appreciate you asking me. I really enjoyed this a lot, and I'm honored to be on here.
No, I really, really appreciate it. Yeah, I really hope people listen to this podcast and really just understand how important food is just in general and can take just like itty bitty things that we talked about and put it towards of what they're doing. Because I know not everybody can have a sports dietitian in their life.
Yeah.
And so even just like listening to podcasts, reading a little bit about it in books and asking for help on just like coaches, parents,
Mhm.
I just think that'll help us, in the next 10 years, maybe we're, making that conscious decision of what we're eating before games. And I mean, I see it now. Some of the athletes that are happening in the college world, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like
Yeah.
18-year-olds, 15-year-olds are going to the
Oh my
soccer
gosh.
league. I'm like, you guys like cut it down. I mean, you're performing well, obviously,
Yeah.
like you're playing at such a young age in the pro
Yeah.
league. So it's awesome to see like obviously they're like successful in their soccer like business, I guess, but also like
Mhm.
they're also feeding themselves well because if
Yep.
you don't, you know, feed yourself, through how you handle stress and what you eat and getting sleep, like you're obviously not going to perform well. And these athletes are doing it. So it's great to see that such young age athletes are able to perform at the pro
Oh
league.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so awesome.
It's incredible.
I know at 15, I was definitely not there. So
My
I
maturity level was not would not have
same,
been
same.
there.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Jamie. I really appreciate it. And I love
Thank you,
talking to you
Morgan.
today.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes. Have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.